Welcome back to the most accurate podcast here at 4for4 Football. As always, I'm your host, John Daigle, joined today by friend in life, John Paulsen. And Paulsen, you know we are truly in football season whenever a football game has actually happened since the last time we recorded.
Yeah, and we got to brace for injuries and any sort of news coming out of these games. But it's an exciting time of year. You know, mid-August, things are really starting to ramp up.
Your draft day strategy article is on the site. Your quarterback sleepers as well is on the site. My team previews over halfway done, continuing to roll out. Will be finished by the end of next week as well. And then we'll jump into default rankings to exploit on each site as the most popular draft weekend, the third weekend of August and Labor Day weekend, is approaching very, very fast for all of us. But until then, just like last week, let's go ahead and get started here with some training camp news that we've been adjusting for. And I want to start with that Hall of Fame game that I mentioned, because Josh Jacobs, with the team's passing game, every important player for the Raiders being benched and healthy scratched, because why are you ever going to play an important player in a preseason game? Josh Jacobs started, and he totaled 7 touches on the first 2 opening drives for the Raiders. When asked afterwards, essentially why, Coach Josh McDaniels said, "I always think it's good for backs to carry the ball in the preseason. There's a lot of things that happen when you're getting tackled and hit that you can't simulate in practice." And we've seen the fallout from that occasion. Josh Jacobs' ADP on Underdog in particular has fallen in the last 7 days since that game kicked off, from 65 overall to 70. I've taken place as well in FFPC leagues, and I've seen, for instance, Damian Harris now go after Ramondre Stevenson in the 10th round. And personally, I ask myself, would I take Josh Jacobs for ahead of Damian Harris? And the answer is always hell no. So I would think that I actually would not take Josh Jacobs then until the 11th or 12th round, if that. I'm curious on where you stand following Jacobs conundrum.
Well, I've been low on Jacobs all offseason, primarily because the new regime there, Josh McDaniels, they ran a committee in New England, bringing over his offense. Just doesn't see. And also Jacobs has said that he doesn't want to be a bell cow. Like, he's actually said that he likes to give up some touches to his backs to keep his other backs in his backfield to keep him healthy and fresh and all that. So it just seems like we're really headed towards a committee of some sort. New England, they always ran, different running backs based on their roles and their offense. And it was pretty predictable in the fact that no one guy is going to carry the load, and they haven't for some time in New England. So they drafted Zamir White, and I think that's an interesting move for them. I don't think they picked up the 5th-year option on Josh Jacobs, so they're not showing him much of a commitment. And certainly, starting him in the first preseason game is an indicator that they want to keep him super fresh or super healthy for the regular season. So I'm not worried that he's not the starter. Like, I'm not worried that he's, not going to have starter touches. I just don't think he's going to have as many touches as he had last year. And I don't think his role is as safe as it was in previous years. So I have him at 31. And to bring up, reference your point about Damian Harris, Harris has moved down my rankings too. I have him at 32. And that's a very interesting question. Is it Josh Jacobs or Damian Harris? And I think Harris I drafted him recently, but it was like the 11th round. He's falling to a point where he's actually a value because he's still the starter in New England and has a high touchdown upside, whereas I don't know if you could say the same about Jacobs. So that might need to be reversed there, 31, 32 with those two. Not drafting Jacobs at all unless he's falling way, way beyond, where I'm drafting maybe a RB4. It's just not a guy I've been targeting this season.
Reminder, Jacobs also, although he did not finish outside the top 34 running backs in any week, you would think, okay, that's a very high floor he offers you. He also didn't finish inside the top 10 and half PPR scoring on Underdog in particular until week 18, when everyone's fantasy season is over. So he also never won your league. He literally just treaded water all season long. And having depended prior on those career highs and targets and catches per game, in order to do even that, we expect that role yet again to be taken from him this year with a new coaching staff. Also, of course, they declined his last year player option. So there is no reason, in my opinion, to even take him when he's falling. I ask myself all the time, If he's here in this league in the 11th or 12th round, is that considered a value? And genuinely, I don't know if it is. I don't think I would take him there. So that's where I stand. And remember, everything I've referenced on Underdog in particular, it is available at 4for4.com/underdog. That is essentially the hub where we keep not only my updated best ball tiers, but all of TJ Hernandez's work on how to win the 2 million in Best Ball Mania 3 and everything else that Jennifer Eakins, Chris Allen, Sam Hawken, all the tools that are going on behind the scenes are there for you. Moving on. Some ominous news, in my opinion. Matthew Stafford is now suffering from what NFL Network's Ian Rappaport describes as thrower's elbow, which is actually reserved for baseball pitchers normally. We do know, per Jordan Rodriguez of The Athletic, that Stafford received an anti-inflammatory shot in March, but the injury is still actually lingering. He mentioned that he felt like, quote, I could make any throw I wanted to, but I'm just trying to be smart. And so where do you stand now, knowing that we really don't have a clear picture of this news as of August 10th?
Yeah, so for me, this is I didn't move him down at all, but I'm not looking to reach for him over a Dak Prescott or a Trey Lance or an Aaron Rodgers. Maybe not even trying to stack at this point in best ball, where you're kind of stuck with him. If he misses a few games, it could be a big problem for you, especially late in the year. I think this is maybe a little bit overblown. He did throw like right after they were talking about this elbow and him sitting out, and he looked good. The arm looked like it had a good zip on it. He's always had a really strong arm. So, even if he loses 2 or 3%, I don't think it's a huge drop off for him. It doesn't seem like they're super, super alarmed in that.
Your dog is alarmed.
My dog has something to say about it. Yeah. It doesn't seem like they're super, super alarmed about his situation, because he's still throwing in practice. They didn't shut him down for a week or anything like that. So what do you think?
My issue is that I have not been drafting Stafford anyhow as a player with no rushing upside. And we know put stats up last year in his age, 33 season? Beyond that, actually, that we don't expect for him to carry over, right? Like a career high in touchdown rate, his third most fantasy points per game for his entire career. And then also the fact that if you step back and look at the bigger overarching picture of the Rams offense, the fact that 80% of their touchdowns came through the air, and that includes Stafford converting 5 of 7 throws on the goal line for a touchdown and 10 of 13 throws inside the 5 for a touchdown. And so, yes, maybe they do naturally carry over that overarching offensive outlook and continue throwing whenever they're inside 10 yards. But I also think that's caused that ridiculous rate of touchdowns through the air for more rushing touchdowns, just to fall forward and average more. As we've seen historically, that's what's happened. I wrote about that in my Rams team preview, actually, on the site. And so, no, I've actually been avoiding Stafford anyhow. What this tells me, the light starts blinking, and that this news affects Cooper Kupp, perhaps, as the overall wide receiver 1, and Allen Robinson, who's getting steamed as a wide receiver 12 to 14, depending where you're drafting. And those are the 2 players I'm more worried about than drafting Stafford, because that means we could draft Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, or Stephon Diggs, the overall wide receiver 1. We could draft everyone, an abundance of wide receivers over Allen Robinson, if it's John Wolford instead. So I've been handling it differently than everyone. I've been drafting John Wolford as like a QB 3 or 4 in deep super flex leagues I've been in over the past couple weeks. I've been slightly more timid on Allen Robinson and still taking Cooper Kupp, mixing them in interchangeably with Justin Jefferson. But honestly, those are the players I'm worried about, not so much taking Stafford in particular, because he goes in a range where I'm not taking him anyhow.
And you could also, at quarterback pivot if you have an issue. In a regular redraft league and you end up with Stafford, and he's now going to miss 4 games, you have options on the waiver wire, and you can stream and do some things. But yeah, for the guys going in the first round or the 4th round, in the case of Allen Robinson, Cooper Kupp going in the first round, it is a little bit alarming. And if you're worried about Stafford's elbow, then you might want to take a Justin Jefferson over a Cooper Kupp, or maybe take a Terry McLaurin over an Allen Robinson, something like that. I think another question at the quarterback front is this a situation where we would start to take Derek Carr? I mean, I'm certainly taking Aaron Rodgers over Matthew Stafford. He's my primary target at the quarterback position. But Derek Carr, Kirk Cousins, are we starting to take him over Matthew Stafford. Cousins is supposed to throw the ball more this year with O'Connell at head coach, and Derek Carr now has Devontae Adams to throw to, and he's finished in the top 15 3 straight years. But you have a player, Stafford, who I think finished quarterback 6 last year. I know he was top 7 or 8, and should be better in year 2 if he's fully healthy.
Cousins also QB 11 and QB 13 in an offense that ran the 4th lowest rate of 11 personnel last year, 3 wide sets, and the 4th highest run play rate from neutral game script in back-to-back years under Mike Zimmer. Now we're expecting Kevin O'Connell, who brings over an offensive blueprint that allowed the Rams to finish top 5 in no huddle and overall pass play rate last year. We expect Cousins to be even more involved. And honestly, he's a dark horse candidate to lead the league in passing touchdowns. So I do think, given this news, it's enough of a concern, especially this early, 5 weeks until they kick off in week 1, that Cousins should be going over Matthew Stafford, in my opinion. I have him in the same tier right now as Rodgers and Stafford on my underdog best ball tiers, but perhaps I need to actually drop Stafford from that mix and put him closer to Derek Carr, like you said. Continuing on, though, you mentioned Kareem Hunt. You mentioned Aaron Rodgers, but Kareem Hunt now, let's go ahead and go to that note. As we know, requested a trade over the weekend, but returned 48 hours later to practice, essentially waving the red flag that he is opting for a hold-in. And Kevin Stefanski, of course, responded, not being happy, saying that if our players are healthy, they practice. Hunt now back practicing, but that just also could mean that Hunt is disgruntled. Hunt could be waiting for a trade, even though, if the Giants are only looking for a second round for Saquon Barkley this offseason and can't even get that, I doubt Hunt gets anything. Also, we know that Dearness Johnson was tendered and is under contract this year as their 3rd string running back, who offers high upside in the event Hunt is gone anyhow. So what is your take on Kareem Hunt's situation, and are you adjusting anything for it?
Well, this was one of those, funny situations that lasted about 24 hours and offered a lot of fodder for fantasy Twitter. And then next thing you know, he's back at practice and practicing. So I don't know what they told him. I guess they might have just started, threatened to fine him, and he just decided, okay, I'm going to go ahead and practice and just try to get my next contract. Or maybe they're saying, okay, we'll look to trade you, but we got to keep this on the down low. You need to practice in the meantime. I don't think that's the case. I think it's probably just like, we're not trading you and you need to play out the season and we'll go from there. Cleveland is so tough because we just don't know who the quarterback's going to be. It could be a great high-flying passing attack, or it could be an extremely run-heavy, very conservative passing attack. Even if they are run-heavy, it doesn't mean they're going to be super productive and be in the red zone a lot and score a lot of touchdowns with Jacoby Brissett at quarterback. So it's been hard to sort of peg where the range of outcomes for Chubb and Kareem Hunt and Dearness Johnson. I'll just say that this year, with Dearness Johnson sort of emerging last year as a very efficient, top 7 type player in terms of his yards after contact per carry, broken tackles per carry, efficiency metrics, and the fact that when all 3 were healthy, they were giving him some touches, when in previous seasons it was just Chubb and Hunt pretty much. I'm a little worried about what sort of committee this is going to be, and if the offense can't move the ball very well, how many touches this backfield will see. Obviously, if Deshaun Watson is playing a majority of the season, this offense is going to be a lot better, and there might be enough for 2 of these guys to be fantasy relevant. But I think if it's Jacoby Brissett, then we're kind of in trouble, and that's why Hunt's been ranked lower in my rankings than maybe where he's finished the last couple of years. And I do think, though, and I was going to talk about him later, but Dearness Johnson is a late round pick flyer that could be very fruitful for you if there's an injury to either Chubb or to Hunt.
Johnson, in my opinion, should be viewed as a player who may have a role on another team. And if that's the case, if he gets cut because Hunt is still here and perhaps they're thinking of extending him, then he could obviously walk into a larger role. Let's say Melvin Gordon's foot injury, for instance, is serious. And now all of a sudden the Broncos are in need of another running back because they really don't have any competition behind those two. All of a sudden, Dearness Johnson maybe lands there. And so that's kind of the situations I'm looking at when drafting Johnson. Not so much that he needs to earn a role in Cleveland, but he could easily land in a much larger role anywhere else. Also, it's tough for Chubb and Hunt. Hunt has averaged under 12 touches per game, 11.8 per game, in his last 20 full starts alongside Chubb the past 2 years. And Chubb hasn't offered anything in the receiving game, just 2 targets per game in those 20 games alongside Hunt and 1.5 catches, adding only 2.5 receiving points on average in those 20 starts. So it's a really tough offense to take seriously, even with an elite offensive line, if Deshaun Watson is not around. And right now it seems like that predicament is more so to end in him missing the entire year than it is only 6-7 games. So I'm struggling to draft any of them, honestly, outside of Johnson, who just has value in the last round.
Yeah, I think Johnson is a good football player, and it's not a bad idea to draft him super, super late. I mean, his ADP is 200. So like he's free at the end of drafts. And, anytime you can add a good player at the end of your draft, it's a good idea.
Now officially onto Romeo Doubs, continuing to earn praise in place of Christian Watson at camp. We have NBC Sports' Peter King mentioning that he believes 4th rounder Doubs will have a prominent role early, quote unquote. Aaron Rodgers himself told reporters that every single day Doubs has made at least one wow play. So much so that the two sat down for lunch on Tuesday to review what minor mistakes Doubs keeps making that he can continue learning from and growing in camp. Doubs is actually no longer a sleeper necessarily. Like, he's going in the 13th, 14th round. Everyone's caught on, but that's on Underdog and FFPC as well. In your home leagues, your best friend probably still has never heard of Romeo Doubs. Also, those magazines that I do support because my friends do them, they don't have Romeo Doubs mentioned since they published before camp. So there's a lot of time to still learn who Romeo Doubs is and sneak him in here. So where have you adjusted him to since he's continued surging in usage at camp?
Yeah, there's a big difference between deep sleepers and, fantasy Twitter, underdog drafts, and deep sleepers for the home leagues. I mean, it's just a wild difference there. But he's been pretty steadily moving up my rankings, just starting to think about how this receiving core is going to shake out. And if you remember, I think we spoke a while ago about, who are we, if you like Rodgers this much, or I don't know, maybe it was a different podcast, but if you like Rodgers this much, John, who are the receivers that you're going to draft with him, or who's, and I was like, well, I'm just waiting for camp to hear some positive things about how the pecking order is shaking out. And the positive thing has been a steady drumbeat for Doubs, the 4th rounder. And part of it's been because Christian Watson's been out with a knee injury. So he's behind the 8 ball, but I think he was already a little bit behind the 8 ball with his route running and just being sort of raw. He's a phenomenal athlete, size, speed guy. But I think this year they were hoping that he could replace Valdez-Scantling directly as a deep threat. And he still may be able to do that. But that, as we know, the Valdez-Scantling role was not a consistent producer in this offense whenever Davante Adams was healthy, or even if he wasn't. So we're looking for who's going to be the trusted target for Rodgers. We know he likes Allen Lazard, but we haven't heard a whole lot about Allen Lazard this camp. It's all been Doubs. And I tweeted out earlier about him going to lunch, or the two of them going to lunch, and how this is reminiscent of the Cooper Kupp, Matthew Stafford breakfasts last year that we didn't really know about until the season had started. So it was good to get this lunch date on the books prior to our drafts. I would say that this is, Aaron Rodgers does not often talk about rookies or heap the sort of praise on any rookies. I think in this situation, we could look at it like there's so much opportunity in this offense. He needs to build up a confidence in somebody. Or we could look at it like this is the typical Aaron Rodgers. He just happens to see a lot of great play coming out of Doubs, and we're starting to view him as one of their starters. So that's where I'm at right now. I think week 1 as it stands, it's probably going to be Lazard, Doubs, and maybe Randall Cobb playing in the slot. And if Doubs is out there 70-80% of the time, then Rodgers is going to turn him into a fantasy relevant receiver. unless he just falls flat on his face and starts to look lost. But he's been great apparently in camp. I guess he had a tough time with Jair Alexander, but a lot of receivers have a tough time with Jair Alexander one-on-one. But yeah, I've suddenly moved him up. He's wide receiver 71 at an Underdog, and I've got him in the low 60s. I think it's 61. So I'm starting to target him there in that 13th round that you mentioned. Maybe a little bit earlier. It depends how my receiving core looks.
I may be biased because I have personally been looking for an out to not draft Allen Lazard in the 7th round where he is now at any cost. Because I don't believe he offers the profile of an alpha to get drafted in the 7th round. He's only there because everyone sees opportunity. Allen Lazard, of course, 8 touchdowns and 40 catches last year. Don't think that's sustainable, especially because he didn't do it his first 3 years in the league. Not to mention didn't eclipse 80 receiving yards in any game. So not a player I really trust. But even if he can dominate underneath and still offer value, not good ADP, right? But over the top, we are looking for that kind of profile, and that's the one that Doubs offers. We're only 1 year removed from 2020 when Doubs actually finished 3rd in the nation on air yards accrued on targets 20-plus yards deep. Like with a career 17 yards per catch in college, this is what Doubs does, is go deep. So I question if he can learn the routes quickly enough to get on the field often and dominate targets underneath. Maybe those are 2 separate things as well, but I do think he can absolutely lead this team deep as a Marquez Valdez-Scantling or even developing Marquez Valdez-Scantling. And that's what I'm banking on in the 13th, 14th round because that's where he is right now. Or as we mentioned earlier, a truly sleeper in your home league. So that is one player I definitely don't want to leave drafts without, especially if you're drafting 6-7 receivers and have room on your bench to stash.
Yeah, and the deep threat thing that you mentioned is interesting because I think his 40 time was like 4.7. So either he didn't run well or his football speed's faster. Watching the highlight catches that I've seen, he does a good job of tracking the ball, pushing off a little bit, but not too much in order to create enough space to catch it. We've seen him beat a lot of defensive backs in the Packers that I don't recognize their number. So it'll be very interesting to see him, start to play in these preseason games to see what he can produce.
Another player I am stashing would be 7th round running back Isiah Pacheco from the Chiefs because the reports are running wild. Continues to work with the first team offense in camp, including running routes from the slot in training camp and being used frequently ahead of Ronald Jones. Pacheco, of course, registered a 4.37 40 at the combine at 6 foot, 215 pounds. Immaculate speed for a player of his size. And honestly, that's what the Chiefs were lacking last year in their backfield. They had no one with pop. And so is this a situation where you want to move Pacheco up personally, or do you view this as another version of Darwin Thompson and consider it actually a reason to get ahead of and draft more Clyde Edwards-Helaire?
I haven't been targeting any of these KC running backs. There was a brief period of time where I had some Ronald Jones, but he's moved down my rankings a little bit. As well when Jerry McKinnon came back. And I think McKinnon was running ahead of him in some drills and things. So I'm just trying to keep an eye on that pecking order and that backfield. But I think Pacheco is going to make the team. But, whether or not he has a regular weekly roles is, remains to be seen. McKinnon was playing ahead of Edwards-Helaire late last year. Then they brought in Ronald Jones, who we know has a certain skill set, which is run between the tackles, and he does it pretty well. He's not good in the passing game. Hasn't been good in the passing game. So he might come in and have that role of 6 to 8 carries. And then Clyde Edwards-Helaire and McKinnon, are splitting the rest of the work. But if they feel like, this rookie has enough juice that he needs to be on the field, we've seen this before, the story before, whereas, a running back, you mentioned him, Darwin Thompson came in fantastic in the preseason. Everybody's drafting him in the weird, the double-digit rounds. They were starting to pick him up, and then he barely played. So, I think just caution with that. And I would like to see one of these. I don't want to see anybody cut, but, you'd like to see one of these veterans be out of the way before we start really banking on Pacheco having a big role or even a weekly role in this offense.
And the one I keep coming back to, even though I'm still drafting the dip, is Ronald Jones, because on a 1 year, $1.2 million deal, it is very possible they just cut him if Pacheco is that important. But also, maybe he's used so infrequently because we know for his career, he was never someone who was going to run routes for the Chiefs or earn targets. They strictly want to use him as a big-bodied back inside the red zone and 10-yard line. And so if that's the case, of course he's being used less frequently on offense because he's not going to be out there running routes anyway. So I actually want to buy the dip and still be ahead of Ronald Jones. But this time of year when people are drafting, it's also good because we forget the last 4 or 5 picks in redraft leagues because we, leading up to this point, have done so many best ball leagues. We're cutting those guys anyways, right? So like I'm absolutely taking a chance on a player like Isiah Pacheco, knowing whenever every team cuts down to 53 men before the final week of the season, I'm fully expecting that I'll either have like the 3rd or 4th running back on the Chiefs roster, or I can just shed him before week 1, use my own waiver wire, shameless plug, that will be out before week 1, and then pick up someone else in his stead. So I still take these chances in redraft leagues. And I would say in deep ones, but honestly, I found myself in an industry league in New York, the flex leagues on Sirius Radio this past weekend. And I took Isiah Pacheco in the 15th round of a 16-team league with 2 flexes. So honestly, like I think he's fine as a player. We should be targeting in essentially every format, especially PPR.
Yeah, I mean,
and you don't have to agree, by the way.
No, there's definitely a difference between best ball and redraft and the types of chances that you can take at the end of drafts. Like if you're looking, even Pacheco in best ball, he might end up on another roster, or he might end up paying off, via injury or an increased role later in the season. I mean, there's lots of different ways that like we said with Dearness Johnson, if you think the player is good, it's good to add him at the end of the draft because talent finds a way on the field at some point in their career, if not this year.
And with that, let's take a quick intermission, and then let's come right back with our deep sleepers and late round league winners. Right now, if you sign up at Underdog as a new subscriber, not only will you receive a free pro subscription to 4 for 4 with access to all of our off-season content, including our around-the-clock Discord conversations, Underdog will also match your deposit up to $100 by 100%. Literally mirror it. And there are no catches. Just download the Underdog app, use the promo code 4 for 4 when depositing. That's the number 4, word, the number again, and presto. I don't know how many you have, Paulsen, but I know I have quite a few terrible names to suggest to everyone, because when we say deep, I am locked into news. I am locked into camp and depth charts. Of course, all my rookie blurbs were also written for fantasy leagues during the draft on that tracker. You can actually go back and find if you're interested in my initial profile and outlook on these players. So I have all the suggestions of 20-round leagues and 16-round leagues. So I suggest we go 1 player each at each position. What about that? 8 total players, 1 each, and I will vary from your normal 12 to 16-round league to deep 20-round leagues.
Okay, so 1 player. So we each have 4 players total, 1 at each
4
position.
Players total, 1 at every position. Let's do that.
And these are deep sleepers and league winners.
Deep sleepers and league winners, yes.
All right, I can do it. Let's do it.
Lots of bad names I'm about to throw out here.
Sounds good.
I will allow you the floor.
Oh, okay. You want me to go first? All right. So deep sleeper at quarterback. I think Davis Mills is interesting. He was better than advertised last year, better than people think. Efficiency numbers are pretty good. Just playing for a bad team and a bad offense. Maybe Nico Collins steps up a little bit. He's got Brandon Cooks, who's good. Now, I'm not saying you should start him or try to pick him in a 12-team redraft league, but if you're in a best ball or a super flex 2-quarterback league and you are looking for a second or third guy and you've waited too long, I think Davis Mills is pretty solid. He's going to have some good games, especially with Houston likely throwing the ball more than they want to because they're trailing.
Oh, that was quick. I expected you to say more. Davis Mills continues to get drafted, as you said, fringe QB2, early high-end QB3. But unlike everyone else going in that range, like a Marcus Mariota, Baker Mayfield, let's say, even though I do like Baker Mayfield, we at least know that Davis Mills is a 17-game starter. Like, this is a quarterback they're evaluating. So unlike those other players, people are drafting backups instead of Davis Mills. And yes, as you said, performed admirably in his last 4 games. So that's kind of what we're leaning on. But I just look at his starts and say, well, at least I have a starting quarterback, which, I can't guarantee some of these other guys are in these last few rounds. So I completely agree. Now, I'm not even going to ask. I'm just going to say it because I've been in enough drafts now to know that Daniel Jones' recency bias has taken hard effect. And a player I genuinely think can be a top 15 quarterback given the offensive change in scheme, right? Brian Dable comes over from the Bills. The Bills last year, of course, ran the fewest sets of multi-tight end formations. Thus, we expect this team with 5 strong receivers with Darius Slayton and Sterling Shepard bringing in the rear. We expect this team to go 5 deep, 4 deep all the time, including Saquon Barkley in the slot. That is their passing attack. Not to mention, when you look at it, you could argue the worst secondary in the entire league, which is great for fantasy. So I generally think Daniel Jones and this new offense with a improved offensive line and upside in the passing game with his legs as well, rushing floor, I think can finish as a top 15 quarterback. And so I have always been drafting Daniel Jones as a QB1 and just handling it that way because he's always available as a low-end QB2, and I think that's incorrect.
That's aggressive. I can see this is one of those situations where I think you're telling yourself a story, and that's okay. Like sometimes these stories turn out to be true and they work out for you. And you look at what Daniel Jones did as a rookie and you want to get back to that because but since then it's been pretty dreadful. 24 touchdowns, 12 interceptions as a rookie, 3,000 passing yards, which isn't a lot, but it was in 13 games, 12 starts. And he can run the ball. So he was averaging like 230 yards passing, almost 2 touchdowns, almost 2 touchdowns per game, passing the ball. And then he also can run. He's never run for less than 21 yards per game. That was as a rookie, a couple touchdowns each year. He's got 5 touchdowns in 3 years as a runner. So the upside is there, and I can see what you're going for. My concern with him is I keep seeing these videos of him throwing the ball in practice, and it's frightening, like some of these passes that he's making. But I think that you have to also, as somebody who does rankings for a living and has been around preseason for 15 years, I guess, just watching these videos come out, is that you have to take them with a grain of salt because the people posting these, some of them have an agenda, and their agenda is that Daniel Jones sucks or that Daniel Jones is great or whatever they want to get out to the world. So I've seen some really inaccurate throws. I've seen some really throws that had no zip. So I'm a little worried on that front, but I do think that Brian Dable is a sharp offensive mind. They do have probably enough talent in the receiving game for him to succeed. And of course, he does add that rushing aspect to it. He's not a player I've been targeting at all. I would have him in one best ball or something as a QB2, QB3 type, but I can see the appeal. Because if you squint, you do see like a Konami Code type quarterback there.
You just have to literally ignore the past 2 years when the Giants scored the fewest touchdowns of any team in back-to-back years because they were run by Gettleman, Judge, and Jason Garrett. You have to completely ignore all of that. So I genuinely think for me, it's a buy low opportunity, even in QB1 leagues. I don't mind hammering out Daniel Jones in the final round for recency bias, taking a chance, knowing that in redraft leagues, remember, we can always cut him and find another quarterback. In most leagues anyhow, some overdraft quarterbacks. But that's the way I've been handling it. What about running back for you?
Well, we're talking deep sleepers and league winners. So I've already mentioned that Dearness Johnson is a favorite of mine in the final rounds. There is a path to him having a big workload somewhere, if not Cleveland. But I guess I want to underline, and this is not a deep sleeper, but it's a sleeper that is it's definitely in redraft leagues. My fireman friend, who I talk about once in a while, probably won't know to draft this guy. So I'm going to mention Darrell Henderson. Just the way, and you feel free to go much deeper to a player that I haven't even heard of.
Oh, I got some bad names for you. Running back.
I got a few.
I got some names.
I've got a few too, but I want our listeners to really start to target Henderson a little bit earlier. If he's on the board there as your RB3, RB4 type, it does look like the Rams are going to have some sort of committee. McVay is talking about it now, where he's got 2 starting running backs, and just like there's a couple of paths here for him. One is if Akers just isn't himself and isn't back. There is the list of running backs that have come back strong from an Achilles tear is extremely short. He did come back late last year, but it was woefully inefficient in his running. And I think what McVay is doing is he's hedging his bet a little bit on Akers, and I don't think he wants to overuse him, especially early in the season. If he rotates the two and Henderson's out playing him, then he has an easy way to sort of start to give Henderson a start and give him the lead touches. On the other hand, if Akers is looking well, then he can start to ramp up Akers towards the end of the season as well. So either way, I think to start the year, Henderson will be in some kind of timeshare, and then he has that upside if anything were to happen to Akers, where we've seen it for the first 12 weeks last year. He was RB12 fantasy-wise, so he's proven that he can produce RB1 numbers when he's the lead back. And as you mentioned, they threw the ball a lot in the red zone last year, and the rushing touchdowns should increase there for the Rams, and Henderson could be a value there as well.
I will also note that if Akers falls to the 6th or 7th round, given the most recent news about him splitting first-team reps with Darrell Henderson, that's where I want to start buying the dip on him. Like, I want to have him over Elijah Mitchell, Antonio Gibson, that little dead zone of running backs, because I think Akers has more touch upside than all those others individuals. My name, I will go soft at first and give you a player that you should draft in the last round of every league, and that is Brian Robinson, because I've come full circle in that I still question his upside, and that Gibson is there for low calorie between the 20s carries on early downs. J.D. McKissick, who earned a 15% target share, is still there from last year. But Brian Robinson, at least it's been made very clear by Ron Rivera, is going to be used as short yardage and goal line back. And I think he can fall forward for touchdowns. And of course, if anything happens to Gibson, he's the insurance that would get 15 to 20 carries, albeit in a Carson Wentz-led offense. So Brian Robinson is a reasonable name to continue drafting, slightly ahead of Isiah Pacheco, who I'm also drafting. The terrible name, John, that you're not ready for, it's actually a group of names, because I think you can draft either Trey Sermon or Jordan Mason in the very last round, because Tyrion Davis-Price is one of the worst draft picks happening right now in the 15th round. Tyrion Davis-Price, of course, the argument everyone makes for him is to have third-round draft capital, even though we saw last year the third-round draft capital of Trey Sermon didn't matter at all. Not to mention that we know they want to use 3 or 4 running backs, given every report coming out of camp. And worse for TDP, didn't play special teams at LSU. Whereas we know last year alone, Jeff Wilson, Sermon, and JaMychal Hasty all play special teams. TDP fumbled 3 times in his final year at LSU. And then he also just wasn't explosive at all. Under 5 yards per carry those last 2 years at LSU, and only 2.8 yards after contact per attempt. And then you look at this 49ers offensive line. Trent Williams makes an argument for himself as the best tackle in all of the NFL. But their interior line includes a left guard who played 5 snaps last year, a undrafted free agent from 2016 at center, and then right guard, apparently, I thought it was going to be Daniel Brunskill, who allowed the 7th highest pressure rate among all guards last year in the NFL. But actually, a 4th-round rookie who played left tackle in college is beating him out right now. At right guard, nonetheless, transitioning to the NFL, UTSA, Spencer Buford played. So overall, as we learned last year, even though no one is actually learning from their mistakes, right? So they're just making the same mistakes again. You should ignore Tyrion Davis-Price and instead just take the next guy as an arbitrage situation. And so even though I don't like Sermon's profile, again, it's a situation where I can just ignore anyone going ahead of him and draft those players instead. And worst case scenarios, we cut those players after week 1. So that's the way I've been handling it. Trey Sermon or Jordan Mason, given the depth of your league, I will continue drafting one of those players.
What about Jeff Wilson?
Jeff Wilson too. All of them.
Okay.
Basically the one who is not being drafted early.
So I'm going to just add another name, since I did a league winner with Henderson. A deep sleeper, I think, Donta Foreman. If you want to bet on another injury for McCaffrey, which nobody really wants to bet on that, but he has gotten injured the last 2 years. If he sits out again for any stretch, I think Foreman plays ahead of Hubbard. He did really well down the stretch last year for Tennessee, and probably, at least a 2-down guy there, and maybe a 3-down player for Carolina.
That's a reasonable name that you should draft. You're right. What about a wide receiver for you?
I would say, for like a league winner type, league winner is a loaded term and overused, but I think Isaiah McKenzie is starting to climb up the ADP a little bit. He's been playing ahead of Jamison Crowder. When I initially did my projections back after the draft, I had McKenzie ahead of Crowder, and basically everybody told me I was wrong. They didn't like come out and tell me I'm wrong, but I was looking at other people's rankings and Crowder is way ahead of McKenzie. I'm like, am I crazy here? Like McKenzie was really good in short bursts last year when he had a chance to get on the field. He also runs the ball a little bit. They get, do gadget stuff with him. And then slowly but surely I fell in with the crowd and I put Crowder ahead of McKenzie in my projections. But then I started to see that he was running ahead of Crowder at camp. And I started to move McKenzie back up, and it just seems to be more and more of a drumbeat with McKenzie being that slot receiver that was so productive, that role that was so productive for Cole Beasley last year. He's attached to a great quarterback and Josh Allen, likely to see 6-7 targets and maybe a couple of rushes or maybe a rush per game. And obviously there are a lot of touchdowns up for grabs there with Allen throwing the ball. So McKenzie is my sort of my league winner, my 13th round, 14th round guy I'm trying to nab there as my wide receiver 5, who I think will, especially in PPR formats, has a lot of upside.
Yep. And we've seen now in 2 career starts without Cole Beasley, Isiah McKenzie has averaged a 24.5% target share and 10.5 targets. Like, he is literally out there every time. He, of course, has, as you mentioned, Jamison Crowder, Khalil Shakur to perhaps compete with. But Isiah McKenzie, given the drumbeat from camp, is definitely a player I keep drafting, even in 16-round leagues. I'll go a bit deeper on that note. Actually, I'll give a quick one that I think is fine. Curtis Samuel, I think is fine. Again, if we're betting on Carson Wentz, I want to do it with the last receiver possible so I can just cut him whenever Wentz is bad. Curtis Samuel is only 1 year removed from finishing second behind Stephon Diggs in total touches in the entire league among wide receivers. And so just to get involved as both a scat back, slot receiver, ability to play out wide as well, I think it's a tremendous opportunity since no one is still taking him. He's available in the last round every single time. So Curtis Samuel, I like quite a bit. And then 2 terrible picks only for 20-round leagues that I've been taking in deeper leagues. One is Noah Brown. Given that there's no competition, Michael Gallup expected to miss week 1. I still question if he's going to end up on the PUP list and miss the first 4 weeks and then be brought along slowly afterwards. So as we know, it's Jalen Tolbert behind CeeDee Lamb. And then, of course, Noah Brown bringing it up from the back. So he'll at least be out there for a Cowboys offense. We still expect to throw quite a bit. And then a very deep one that no one's taking. So be very skeptical. I've been mixing in Montrell Washington into Russell Wilson stacks, the Broncos 5th rounder, who is a chess piece, but more importantly, like his lone SEC game last year totaled, as a small school receiver, mind you, from Stanford, still totaled over 140 yards and multiple touchdowns from scrimmage on offense in that better competition game. Not to mention ran 91% of his routes from the slot where the Broncos need him after Tim Patrick's injury in his final year at Stanford. So I think the opportunity's there. He's working quietly with the first string offense in camp as a deep threat because that's what he offered as a primary punt and kick returner, an explosive wide receiver in the offense there. So yeah, I don't mind mixing him in as all literally in the very last round of deep leagues.
I would add one more deep last round type guy, especially 20 round.
Bring it.
James Proche from Baltimore. Devin Duvernay is supposedly going to be that's who everybody thinks is going to be the number 2 receiver there. But Proche has apparently had a really strong start to camp. Duvernay's been out with injury. He's back now, but apparently he's making plays in every practice, and he's doing stuff. He's a 5'11", doesn't have much speed, but a good route runner, and he's doing stuff all over the field, not just short stuff, but also going deep and making plays. So he's, as the potential 3rd option in the passing game for Baltimore, that's not bad for the 20th, 18th, 20th round.
And finally, for tight end, I'm going to go first because there are a lot of actually deep league options, dynasty options that I think everyone should be on everyone's radar. Greg Dulcich, for instance, very deep league as a tight end 3, tight end 4 in premium scoring, given that Tim Patrick's injured, and maybe that leads to more 12 personnel out of default for this offense, more multi-tight end sets. Jonnu Smith as well, who, remember, just last year did get paid more guaranteed money than Hunter Henry, could find his way into an offense we expect to be more pass heavy, although Patriots camp reports are basically the only negative reports you can find. And who would have thought, given that it's a Joe Judge and Matt Patricia offense? I thought they were very intelligent play callers. But no, I think the one player who actually adds value as a potential starter and week one starter, more importantly, is Mo Alley-Cox. We know the opportunities there. Jack Doyle vacates a team high 20 tight end routes per game, but also the reports at a camp are great for Mo Alley-Cox because Jelani Woods, who we know was only drafted as an athletic specimen, literally the highest athletic score in combine history at his position. But what I feared was he actually just couldn't play the position. He's just a super athlete. And word at a camp is basically they might as well turn him into a linebacker. He's like the kid who dunks on the wrong goal when he gets a rebound because he wasn't sure how to go. Like, that's what's happening with Jelani Woods at camp right now. Always lining up wrong, always running the wrong route. And Kylan Granson, as we know, totaled 15 targets last year and couldn't play over Mo Alley-Cox on offense. So no competition whatsoever for Alley-Cox with a much better quarterback this year. That's the player I take literally every single time, and I'm more than comfortable even having him as just like a tight end 2 or drafting him as my sole tight end in the last round, throwing him out there week 1 and hoping I get ahead of his upside.
I love that call. He was my deep sleeper at the position. I have another. I mean, Alley-Cox is very interesting because of, I think, Matt Ryan coming into Indy. If you just look at what Ryan has done with tight ends lately, Austin Hooper, 787 yards, receiving 660 in 2019 and 2018. Hayden Hurst, 571 yards, 6 touchdowns in the following year after Austin Hooper left. And then Kyle Pitts, obviously 1,000 yards receiving last year as a rookie. I think Alley-Cox is a great call. I'm curious if you would take him over Austin Hooper, who is now the starting tight end for the Tennessee Titans. They have had a lot of receiver turnover, and apparently Hooper has a nice bond already with Ryan Tannehill. The two have good chemistry, and I think he could certainly be a top, if not the top, red zone option in that offense, given the receiving personnel. I mean, Robert Woods is not known to be a red zone guy. Treylon Burks is kind of working his way from wide receiver 3 to the wide receiver 2 spot, trying to beat out Nick Westbrook. So I'm wondering about Austin Hooper. I think he's always available extremely late. I can get him as my tight end 3 most of the time in best ball. Obviously, he had the 2 really good seasons with Atlanta and then signed a big deal with Cleveland, and they basically cut his playing time in half. And he shared time with David Njoku and Harrison Bryant, I believe, and just didn't get a chance to play full snaps. But I think he's going to play starter snaps in Tennessee, and they're going to need him. What do you think of Austin Hooper?
I think he's good, but I'm only taking Alley-Cox over him because, remember, this being redraft season, most of the time we only draft one tight end. That's how we just play the position. We don't waste our roster spot on that because everyone drafts for week 1, and we want to draft backup running backs, backup wide receivers who get thrust in the opportunity in week 1 if there's an injury occurs in the final week of camp, and thus we don't have to waste our waivers on that. And so knowing I'm only going to draft one tight end if I go this route, I think Alley-Cox personally has more upside, a more explosive player than Austin Hooper. Also, this is the time of year I start looking at week 1 schedules, and although Hooper's is good, they play the Giants week 1, Alley-Cox and the Colts play the Texans, and so I just expect them to run him over. So I do still prefer Alley-Cox, but it's very close. And it's only strictly for upside, knowing that we could just end up cutting both of those players anyhow after week 1.
Yeah, another player I'd like to mention is Hayden Hurst, who I mentioned earlier as part of this blurb with Alley-Cox, but he's now in Cincinnati, high-flying offense. If there's one injury to Boyd, Chase, or T. Higgins, all of a sudden he's the third option in that passing game. And I think he's going to even get to 500 yards and 5 or 6 touchdowns just by default, even if everybody stays healthy.
And good report so far out of Bengals camp for Hayden Hurst. What else do you have coming out on the site for everyone this week?
Well, you mentioned my quarterback sleepers, values, and breakouts article, but I'm going to release the running back one next. And I hope to get receiver and tight end out the remainder of this week once we're done streaming this podcast. I'm excited about getting into the late August and really get into the crux of the fantasy drafts. I got my main event draft coming up, which I'm excited about, and hopefully doing a best ball draft with you, maybe 1 or 2 of those, John. Maybe we can get on and stream a best ball draft either at FFPC or Underdog, who we love. Underdog, a great site.
Just listen to the show. We love
Great,
Underdog.
Great interface. So I'm wrapping up those articles and then kind of moving on with my month.
And a reminder, a lot of us, including myself, are on our way to the Fantasy Football Expo in Canton. So if you're around, you recognize me, one, I'm sorry. But if you also listen to the show, please feel free to reach out. Drinks on me if I happen to see you over the weekend. But until then, until next time, be a little bit kinder than what's required. We'll see you then.